Right, good afternoon everybody. My name's Vish Patel. I'm a consultant with Canary One Training, or Canary One Group, stand number 74 just there. And I'm here this afternoon to talk about DevOps, and in particular, the role of project management and how project managers need to adapt in a DevOps environment. I've been talking to a lot of clients, and it's something which is starting to come up more and more on the agenda of CIOs and IT directors. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to use this podium, if you like, to think about the considerations more from a project management capacity. Now, I'm often told that DevOps is a bit like Agile, and it's a bit like Cloud, and it's a bit like, you know, all these other things. They've been around for a while, it's just rebadged, and it's much the same as what people did in the 80s and what they did in the 90s and the 2000s and whatnot. But my view is slightly different in the sense that, yes, that may have been the case, but I think the technology and the way in which technology is consumed and the expectations of the consumer is such that DevOps really brings something to the table now. And I think it's quite an exciting time, and we'll see why it's so high on the agendas of CIOs and IT directors at the moment. Right, so just moving on. Before I get into it, a bit of a shameless plug and an advertising opportunity. But like I said, I work with Canary One Group. We're an accredited training company, and we do consultancy and recruitment around the project and program management area. We're just over there at stand 74, so if you do want to have a chat about anything in particular, whether it's this or anything else, just wander over and say hi. Right, so what we're going to cover today. So before we go into the project manager considerations, I do want to talk about and set the scene almost. So I'm going to cover off why I think DevOps is important. I do want to talk a little bit about, you know, what is DevOps. You'll see, different people have their own opinions and interpretations. I'm just going to give you mine, right? It's probably not going to be the right answer. It's probably not going to be the wrong answer. I'm just going to give you what I think DevOps means. And how do we get there? So if we all agree that DevOps is something which we want to do and we understand and we think it's going to add value to our businesses, well, how do we get there? So what are the top 5 things or 7 things we can do to get us onto that journey? And then finally, just to close off, a little bit about us as project professionals, what we need to consider. So I'm going to talk about 5 areas which I think project managers need to kind of adapt almost their way of thinking to be relevant in this sort of fast-changing environment. Right, so and as I mentioned, I'm quite excited by DevOps. I've been involved in a lot of conversations around this, around Agile, why should we care? Why should any of us care about DevOps? What does it mean? Well, look, in the next 60 seconds, the internet reckons that there's going to be 370,000 minutes of Skype calls, over 2 million searches on Google, 510,000 comments on Facebook. I mean, you can read the rest. I think the point is that we're living in a really fast-changing environment. There's a lot of data being created. There's a lot of data being exchanged. There's a lot of data being consumed. And what this is doing is it's making connections. It's making connections between individuals, making connections between businesses. And all this is driven by people and ultimately technology. This little thing here has really help set the expectations of individuals, right? I mean, I've got probably more computing power than, you know, various missions to the moon in my pocket. But also what it's done is it's made people aware about technology, applications. You know, these guys, Facebook and Google, have probably set the expectations around, application functionality being released almost on a daily basis. Forget about 6-month release cycles or annual release cycles. We're talking about daily release cycles now. So I think people are going into a work environment with a different mindset and a different set of expectations as well. So I think what this shows is the context against which, you know, things like Agile and DevOps is being discussed in. I also found a really interesting statistic. So according to the IDG CIO Tech Poll, for organizations of 1,000 employees or greater, a lot of the CIOs have DevOps DevOps initiatives either in flight or they've got DevOps initiatives planned as well. That's great for the 1,000 employees plus, but I think it's also relevant to mid and small sized businesses. I think they can really use the thinking, the concepts, almost the philosophy behind DevOps to realize benefits within their organizations. Because I think, if anything else, probably those smaller and mid-sized organizations have got more to benefit from this. I think that the benefits that are brought around this have a bigger impact on their businesses than perhaps some of the larger corporates. So I think it's quite an interesting statistic against which to frame our conversation. So what exactly is DevOps, right? So I've kind of talked about it and I've told you how excited I am about it, but what exactly is it? So let's start with a definition from IBM, right? So IBM thinks that DevOps is enterprise capability for continuous software delivery that enhances the ability for organizations to seize market opportunity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite a wordy quote. I've probably been looking at it for a number of weeks and I still don't understand what that really means. So I had a stab at it. Now I think what DevOps means to me is, the word in itself is around bringing development and operations together. Something that's easier said than done, really. DevOps isn't something which is tangible. It's not a product that you can just go out and buy and implement in your organization. It's not a piece of technology that you can, sort of deliver to your users or to your development teams, your operational teams. I think it's more of a cultural shift in the way in which organizations are structured and they think about software release and delivery and development. And at the heart of it is about bringing development and software together, but it doesn't necessarily mean they've got to sit under one roof. I think it's all about the way in which they think about what they need to do, the bit that they contribute to the delivery life cycle, from sort of inception through to release. And what have you. So it's about bringing them all together into a single integrated process. I think that's at the heart of what DevOps is about. The other thing to add is it's not a one-off exercise, right? So it's not like you just go out there and, for Scrum, go and get a Scrum Master and just rejig your organization and, there you go. You're running software in an agile Scrum manner. I don't think it's as simple as that. I think with DevOps, it's a continuous process. I think once you start on a journey, you're continuously going back and sort of getting better at it, getting slicker at it, right? So I think that's at the heart of it. And I think that's why people often refer to it as a culture or a philosophy, because it's not a one-off endeavor. It's a continuous mindset in the way in which software is developed and then released into the environment and then maintained throughout. And there's often a struggle, right? I mean, we all know that within change, people are the hardest bit, right? It's easy to go and release a bit of technology or implement a new process to do something, but actually getting people to think in a different way, getting people to adhere to the new processes and the way of working that you're trying to put in is the most difficult bit. And you can understand why, right? I mean, look, the development team are focused on delivering new ideas, they're focused on producing new software, new functionality for the business, and they're being put under pressure by the business themselves because they want, the latest thing that's going to, get them more customers, give them that competitive edge in the marketplace. So that's what the development team are doing. And actually, they've been getting better at it, right? I mean, Agile's, it's erupted. Everyone's wanting to do things in an Agile way, right? So they've been pretty good. I mean, I think they've done a pretty good job of it. However, on the other side of the fence, you've got the operations team, right? They don't like disruption. They like consistency. They like stability. They like predictability. They want to know that if I put a bit of code in the environment, it's not just going to break. So what that's often led to is this kind of behavior where things are thrown over the fence. The developers will build something, throw it over to the operations team. The operations team will put it in the environment, it will break. They'll then throw it back over the fence for the development team to fix. They'll then fix it, throw it back over the fence. And there's a sort of a breakdown in communication, right? Because both sides of the fence are driven by different objectives. So how do we bring that together? How do we make sure that how do we make sure that they're all sort of working for the same objective and moving in the same direction? I think the heart of it is around collaboration, right? It's quite obvious, really, but how do we make that happen? I think at the heart of it is how do we bring the development team, the business as well, because actually at the end of the day, the requirements, the need for any change comes from the business, right? They're the ones that are looking for the new software, they're looking for the new product, they're looking for the next edge that they're going to get with their customers and their competitors. So we need to somehow try and bring those guys together in order to try and achieve near real-time development and deployment. So what this means is that whilst the development teams are getting better with new methodologies, Agile being one of them, and all the different flavors of it, they're getting great. But then things are then hitting operations, and they're ending up with a backlog almost, a release backlog. They've got change freezes in place where between October and February we can't do anything because people are off for Christmas and we can't touch the live environment, and we've got tech releases going in there, so we can't have functional releases. And again, a similar thing over summer, everyone's on holiday, so you can't really do anything. So you end up with these pockets of release windows where things need to be put into. Well, that doesn't quite work when you're doing Agile, because these guys are continuously developing new things. So we need to try and get to a point where we're all streamlined towards near real-time or development, deployment. And that can only really be driven through automation throughout the life cycle. I think the ops teams, there is automation there, but I think the automation is around making their environments resilient, stable, predictable. It's not around automation to be able to drop in changes constantly and continuously. So I think that's at the heart of DevOps and making it happen. And ultimately, it's about delivering innovation faster. That's the aim of the game. So it's around agile projects to help ensure that the development is done quickly. It's around reusing existing services. So the operations guys need to get clever around how they can use technology, how they can use automation to reuse existing services and free up time and resources. And what I mean, as an example, I worked with a client where they would have dedicated environments for all of their ERP, CRM systems. Well, actually, they could bring environments up and down, with a little bit of technology, with a little bit of process change, almost on the fly, right? So actually, they can save on computing resources, they can save on all the paperwork, the change that sits alongside of that. So it's about getting smarter around reusing resources. I think that sort of sits with the point previously, which is around virtualization, using new technologies and solutions to help with that. And again, automated configuration to allow rapid deployment. Real-time monitoring to resolve issues. So rather than waiting for something to just break, having solutions in place and having processes in place which are continuously monitoring the performance of code in the live environment. So as soon as something's put on there, if there's a degradation in the CPU usage, if there's a spike in memory usage, whatever it may be, that we capture that early, and we're able to then use the processes that we've got in place to then get a fix out fast. And that talks to the previous point as well, using data to drive continuous improvement. So as I mentioned, I think DevOps is something which is continuously improving. You're continuously learning and feeding that back right up front and doing that. And I think using data to drive that is quite important. Right, so now if you believe in everything that I've said, how do we get there, right? Sounds great. How do we get there? So I think the key thing is start by recognizing that there's an issue. I think a lot of organizations just accept that that's the norm. They accept that things break in ops. They accept that, they don't have, test environments would replicate live, and that's just the way things happen, right? So you test something in pre-production, works great. Put it into production, it breaks, right? That's almost become the norm for a lot of organizations. So I think the first thing is just start recognizing there's an issue. Start reflecting on what you're doing. And often here's examples of things that happen, right? I don't have any spare capacity. So the infrastructure guys are saying, well, it's great that you want a test environment which replicates live, but I don't have any infrastructure to give you that. The testers are saying, well, I'm testing something which is not even like what the environment is going into. The app support guys are constantly firefighting, things are breaking, incidents are being raised. They're just constantly on the back foot. And then the business is saying, what on earth are IT doing? Why can they not deliver a bit of change when I've just been able to update my Facebook app on my phone within minutes, right? What's going on? So I think these are some of the sort of telltale signs of where DevOps and bringing the developers and the operations team together can really add benefit to an organization. So once we've done that, once we've actually reflected on what's going on, I think we're ready to start. So a report by Computer Associates said that there's 4 or 5 things that an organization will eventually do to address this. So I think the first thing is to form teams that integrate all of the disciplines, right? And this is not a big new operating model exercise where you get in, Deloitte or anyone in to rejig your whole environment. It's about identifying, opportunity areas, about identifying projects or initiatives that we can, pilot this in, right? Can we bring those teams together? Can we come up with the processes that enable the communication to flow in an efficient manner? How can we help support the operations guys to be able to bring up environments, being able to support what the testers need, the testers being able to reinforce what the developers have produced and tested, and then ultimately the developers being able to give the business that level of assurance that what they are building and what they are putting into live is actually adding value to what it is that they need to do. So, this is a key one, right? Communication, cross-skilling. How many organizations have we been to where you start a new job or you start on a new initiative to do something, the people change, the organization changes, the processes are new, you've got new technology and tools, but actually there's no training, right? There's no continuous training, there's no onward training, a new employee joins, it's just pick it up on the job. So I think we can do better around improving the education and communication that we send out to our people, and actually doing a bit of cross-skilling as well. So bringing the operations guys into the world of the developers and bringing the developers into the world of the operations team to help feel each other's pain a little bit. Because I think that's what helps break down the communications, that's what helps break down the silos, to then make an environment which is conducive to change. Yeah, look, reevaluate, rebuild your software, your service delivery cycle. I think, as I said before, using a small project as a little test bed is a great way of doing this. And actually being able to take a step back and say, well, how does information flow? How does data flow? How do we transition from one phase to another? How can we work closer together? I think that's a really important stage. As I mentioned previously, it is around automation, right? So I think operations bring in automation to bring up environments quickly using, testing, automated testing engines. It's about bringing bringing technology into that kind of DevOps environment to help support a lot of the things I've been talking about. And it's about picking the right place in which to do this. Go in and trying to implement this when you're in a big SAP ERP environment, it's probably not the best place to start, but actually picking up a small initiative which is more conducive to fast delivery, more conducive to actually getting the resources, times to dedicate onto a new initiative is probably the way to start. So I think what the Computer Associates study effectively concluded to was that however organizations start, it always tends to fall into these 5 areas. So, with all that said, now that we've got operations and we've got the developers talking and working closely and they're all happy and things are just happening, what about these guys? What about the project managers? Does that mean that project management's dead? Well, I think ultimately you still need people to bring people together. You still need people to kind of keep the thing ticking along. You still need people that's got the big picture in mind and how we want to get there. So I don't think project management's dead, but I think as project management professionals, we need to start thinking about the impact of what DevOps is going to have in terms of the way in which we engage on our projects and with our stakeholders. So with that said, I think there's 5 areas of focus. So I think there's a focus around the organizational change and the impact that has. I think we need to think about test as you go and how does that impact us as project professionals. Show versus tell. How do we report status, right? Up till now it's PowerPoint slides, right? Yeah, EV, PV, all that sort of stuff, right? Well, how about show versus tell? How about we actually show products, right, as a status update? Which is in the heart of what Agile talks about, but actually if you haven't got the operations team producing the environment, getting that infrastructure there to be able to do it, well, it's difficult to do midway through an initiative. The concept of all requirements being equal. Again, this sort of plays very strongly to the Agile space, but you know, what tends to happen is whenever your back's up against it, you know, the NFRs, the non-functional requirements, go by the wayside, right? So it doesn't matter if the UI is a bit messy. It doesn't matter if, you know, this button doesn't actually do anything, as long as the functionality is broadly there. Well, you know what? If you're going to be showing people what you're doing rather than telling them what you're doing, then you probably need to start treating all requirements equally and actually prioritizing across the board, as opposed to functional over non-functional requirements. And actually getting into a mindset where you're expecting the worst, right? So let's just go into that in a little bit more detail. So organizational change, you know, out goes organizing employees based on department, and in comes integrating everybody into a single team, right? Breaking down those silos, so actually not having a fence there to throw things over. Standard project management methodologies don't always work in a DevOps environment. And a lot of that is because you know, the lines of reporting are often hierarchical, and you know, the way in which issues are escalated and things like that are based on a very hierarchical model. But actually, if we can bring everybody under one roof, then that's got to help with collaboration, and it's got to help with trying to break down those silos. The other thing I talked about was test as you go. So we often defer quality assurance right to the end, but actually, if we work together and actually rephase the software, the delivery lifecycle a little bit, there's no reason why we couldn't build unit test, integration test, and have a QA environment done, right? Especially if we're able to bring up environments on the fly, if we have automated solutions for doing the testing. You know, there's a different way of being able to run this. And I think that can only really happen if we can bring operations and development together. I think it's quite self-explanatory, this one, actually. But actually out goes just telling people about status updates, right? RAG charts, EV, PV, that sort of thing. And actually in comes showing stakeholders a tangible product, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, the finished product, but it has to be something where the business or the stakeholder can really continually buy into and actually support and give you that time. Because often it's the case that during, you know, the stakeholders are like absolutely enthused at the beginning of a project, and then a few months pass, you don't really hear from them, you don't really get the level of engagement from them, and then as it comes towards the end, all of a sudden, they're involved. And sod's law, it's always a case when, you know, things aren't going right, you know, the project's been delayed, it's over budget, whatever it may be. But actually by showing them the progress, you're getting their buy-in. They're able to help you maybe prioritize your requirements, right? They may see something and say, actually, you know what, we're pretty much there with that. Let's just get that into the live environment and then focus on some of the other requirements to be in the next stage. So I think there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot we can actually get through showing versus telling. I think it's plays to the previous point around all requirements being equal. You know, we need to move away from, you know, functional requirements being king, to prioritizing all requirements equally and actually trying to break this up. I think Agile does that quite well, but I don't think often that feeds all the way through, because from an operations perspective, they need to be aware of these non-functional requirements. They need to build environments and infrastructure which is going to support, 3 millisecond latency or 99.x uptime, whatever it may be. They need to be involved in that, and they need to know when requirements are coming in and out so they can react to those accordingly. And hoping for the worst, or expect the worst, and hoping for the best. I think we're always, eternal optimists. Whenever we're kicking off a project, we think we can deliver and produce everything that's on the requirements spec. We rarely ever say no to the business. The business rarely ever give us the option to say no. But however, if we can design for failure and always assume that happens, that becomes part of the mindset, and always being able to react to those situations and always thinking about that and building that into whatever designs that we have in place. Well, that's the end of it. We've covered off a lot, and I've kind of run through that, quite quickly. But I think that kind of takes the journey from what I think is important, why I think DevOps is important. Because as I said, development has got it nailed, or is starting to get it nailed in terms of agile, but the operations perhaps haven't kept up, or they haven't been brought in the loop. And hopefully that's given you an overview of some of the things, or some of my thoughts around DevOps, why it's important, and some of the things that I think we need to do as project professionals to stay relevant and stay applicable. So thank you very much for your time. We're at stand 74. Please feel free to come over, say hi. If you want to know any more information, happy to share that with you. But if anyone has any questions, more than happy to take those. Yeah, thank you.